Good. All right. Well, again, good morning to you. In true Canadian fashion, if you have a father you want to bless, or your father wants to be blessed, we've got a whole bunch of Tim cards that we want to give to our dads today. And so at the end of the service, find your way up here. There should be enough on here for you to take somebody for coffee. And we want you to do that. And so just our way of making you know that we know you're there and we honor you. And now, you know what? I can do this. This is going to be really cheeky, but I can look at those of you who are online right now. See why you need to come? All right? Because there's no way for me to get a Tim card to you. But however, I'll say this, that if you call me, I'll take you for coffee. So we'll do it that way, all right? If you have your Bible, I invite you to turn to the Gospel of Luke, chapter 15. I'm going to rearrange some things here because you know I kind of like to wander around a bit. The Gospel of Luke and chapter 15. What am I going to do here? That'll work. And the story that we're going to look at begins in verse 11. And if you've been around the church for any length of time, you probably have heard this story read before. And when I tell you what it's usually referred to, you'll go, oh yeah, okay, that's right. It's the story of the prodigal son. And I have spoken from this passage lots of times over the course of 30 years of preaching. That's hard to believe, isn't it? Started when I was 4. And I've come at it from the perspective of the young man who wandered away, who just sort of didn't want to be under his father's rule anymore, was anxious to get his inheritance and ran off and squanders it, and then the story tells of how he comes back. And I've considered that and been reminded about how in every one of our cases, in every instance, doesn't matter who you are or where you have found yourself or gotten yourself to right now, you can come home. That's the story that is just expressly a part of this story, is that if you have wandered as far from God as you possibly think you can and believe that He wants nothing to do with you, you are so far wrong. He is waiting for you to come home. I've talked about this passage from the perspective of the so-called good son who stayed home and dutifully cared for his father's fields and was just obeying everything that was supposed to be. But if you read the story carefully enough, you realize that this guy develops pretty much a rather haughty, selfish attitude where he begins to look down on his brother who wandered off. And we've been reminded as we looked at that one of the things that those of us who are endeavoring to stay close to God and to walk with Him, that we must always, always, always guard ourselves from any kind of arrogance that we've got it. And those guys who are messing around out there, they're just somehow lesser and God loves them less than us. That couldn't be further from the truth either. We are always meant to be, the language, dying to self and putting others first. And I've looked at it from the perspective of the Father. And in fact, there has been some significant, influential preachers these days who have actually said, you know what, we've been calling it the prodigal son for all these years, but maybe that's not the right title. Maybe the proper title is to call it the prodigal father. Because in the context of that day, and we'll read the story, we see in this story a father acting anything but what a father is expected to act like in the context of that culture and day. Now here's the deal. Prodigal. What does it mean? Anyone? Just throw out your definition. Prodigal. Lavish? Oh, I'm not sure. Okay. Wayward, that's probably getting closer. So did you ever notice that the word prodigy has the same root? Prodigy is a rather positive term, isn't it? A prodigy is someone who is distinct. They stand out. They are able to do things that others can't do. That's positive. You're a prodigy. That's awesome, right? But if you're a prodigal, you're standing out for all the wrong reasons. You're doing that which you're not expected to do. And so we've talked about the prodigal father because he does not respond to this wayward, disrespectful son the way that we would expect to. And it's meant, in fact, to be a story of the picture of God, again, that He will not treat us the way that our sins deserve if we come to Him in a humility and a brokenness. He will not act like a typical father. He will love us. He will love us. He will love us. So that's going to be our framework for the way I'm going this morning, I thought that I would kind of dig out from this some characteristics of how I as a father, how others as fathers are meant to conduct ourselves with respect to our children, regardless of whether they are good kids or not. In my house, in my family, there are 5 children, and I can say this online. My sister and brother sometimes watch, so maybe they're waiting to hear what I'm about to say with that bit of a setup. But it was not uncommon to refer to me as the white sheep of the family. Right? Like there's some pretty dumb choices that my siblings have made, right? But I kind of maybe I learned vicariously through their goofiness and made some choices that has at least kept me from some of the consequences that they have had to deal with in the course of their journey. Not trying to suggest that I'm better. I have spectacular siblings. They're so bright and they have done well. But they would say that I've been able to avoid some things that they were not able to avoid, and it was directly related to the choices that they were making. One thing that we have in common, though, is that we had a father who wasn't always good. Now, I want you to know that I had a pretty good relationship with my father. It just wasn't really a father-son relationship. My dad was a very powerful man in terms of temperament. Strong, it served him well. He was a very, very effective and successful salesman. For a season of his life, things went way off the rails. But at the end, he finished pretty well. He was a publisher of a newspaper and really kind of put himself into a place that by many people's standards were pretty impressive. But the middle section. I don't drink. The Church of the Nazarene as a denomination has historically been a denomination that has strongly recommended that its people not drink. But I don't drink just because the church says that I probably shouldn't drink. I don't drink because I'm afraid to. I don't drink because I have seen what substances have done to my father and to my siblings to a lesser extent. When my father drank, whatever goodness that was within him was overwhelmed by incredibly poor actions. And it cost him his family. It cost him his wife, it cost him his family, and it resulted in ultimately that when he died, there was sharp estrangement from some of his kids. Now, I was very young. I never experienced any of that firsthand. It's all stories that I've basically learned. But the consequence of that was that for many years, I didn't have any contact with him. And when we reconnected, there had been such a season lost that we connected with kind of all right, we're going to develop a friendship, a relationship here. There was an occasion that happened when I had my first son. And my father, and he had remarried my stepmother, who I'm close to and love and haven't had a chance to be with for a while and look forward to when I can be with her again. He and my stepmother were traveling through the city, and they had a hotel room just in the city, and they were leaving right away, and they phoned and said, "Hey, is there any way you guys can come by?" And so we packed David into the car seat, and we headed over there, and we sat in the hotel room. And at one point, he made this comment to me. He said, "You're very affectionate to your son," which you can put together means he's processing this, that I wish I had been more that way. He didn't say that, but it was pretty hard to miss that message. I had made a decision that I was going to be physically affectionate with my sons. It was just a conscious decision. The night ended. He walked us down to our car. I got David plugged into the car, and Linda was climbing in that side, and I was standing there between two cars. It's just him and me, and we'd kind of come to the end of the conversation, and it's time to say goodbye. I'd never hugged my dad in any kind of meaningful way since I was a little boy. And I knew that it was like everything in him was, I don't know how to do this. One of the most regretful moments of my life is that I did not reach out and hug my father then. I knew that's what he wanted. We just didn't kind of have that relationship, so I just didn't do it. But it was cordial, and we said goodbye, and we had lots of times to talk after that. But that moment just sticks out in my brain so very, very much. When my dad died some years later, my stepmother and he were living in Mexico, and so I got the phone call in the middle of the night, and the next day we got word that the funeral was going to happen fairly quickly. That's custom in Mexico. You just don't wait around there. And I checked. There was this. I wasn't even sure I wanted to go, but there was no way I was going to be able to get down there. But I was asked, could you write something? Could you write something that could be read at the funeral? So I remember taking my computer and going downstairs where my wife had her piano studio and slouching down on the floor in the dark with just the glow of the computer on my face, and what am I going to write? And my dad was a big Cubs fan and Minnesota Vikings fan, and I just started to bawl. I wept. And I got angry. Because, see, I knew the stories of what he'd done to my mom when he was drunk, and I knew the way that he'd treated my older siblings when he was drunk. And though I'd never experienced myself, what I did experience was that there was years of absence when he was supposed to be there and he wasn't there. And I was angry with myself. Why are you crying for this man? You have a good friendly relationship with him, but what's this all about? Anyway, I did what I could, and I wrote it, and I sent it, and it was some years later, because that stuck with me. It was some years later that I was able to put my finger on what was going on that day in that room as I wept for my father. I was mourning what should have been and now never could be. I want to look at this story. We're going to read it. You've heard it before. I already identified for you kind of the three dominant themes that are typically drawn from this, but I have 6 quick thoughts that seem to jump out for me. Although Jesus is telling the story to make it plain that all of us can come back into a relationship with God, it just seems to make sense to me that if this is how God conducts himself as a father towards his wayward children, that there's some things in there that speak to how I'm supposed to conduct myself with respect to my children and those of you who are in the same place. Luke chapter 15, beginning of verse 11. Jesus is speaking. It's his words. There was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." And so he divided his property between them. Not long after that, the younger son got together all that he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. And after he'd spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and he hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his field to feed pigs. Remember, this is a Jewish boy. And if there's one thing that Jewish boys don't want anything to do with, it's pigs. That's how far he has gone in his degradation, is that he's left there. And he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, and no one gave him anything. Jesus' listeners now get it. They can't imagine anyone falling any further away than that. And when he came to his senses, though, he said, "How many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I'll set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men.' So he got up and he went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. And he ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and he kissed him. And the son said to him with his prepared speech, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son.' But his dad doesn't even let him get to the end of it all. He says, 'Quick, bring the best robe. Put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf. Kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found.' So began to celebrate. Meanwhile, the older son was in the field, and when he came near the house, he heard music and dancing, and he called out one of the servants and asked him, 'What's going on?' 'Your brother has come,' he replied, And your father's killed the fattened calf because he has him back safe and sound. Well, the older brother became angry, refused to go in. And so his father went out and pleaded with him. Again, the father going out to his son. But he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders, yet you never gave me a young goat so that I could celebrate with my friends. But when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fattened calf." "My son," the father said, "you're always with me. You have everything. Everything that I have is yours. We had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead. He's alive again. He was lost, but now he is found." 6 quick thoughts to jump off of this. The model father, right? Fathers, you teach your children from the moment that they can understand. And you don't relent. You don't stop. You keep teaching them the praiseworthy things of God. There's no question that this boy who ran off and squandered everything knew that he was doing wrong, knew that what he was going to do was going to be offensive, and he did it anyway. But the father clearly had been faithful in teaching this boy the way to honor his father and his family and the people around him and to honor God. Fathers, don't ever, ever, ever stop teaching your children. And if you have dropped the ball up to this point and have not been doing it, graciously look for ways to begin to model and teach and stand for the things of God. The model father has respect for individual autonomy. I'll tell you another story about my dad. And I don't mean this to be condescending or slanderous or anything like that. My dad had a very, very strong personality, and he had very, very strong opinions when it came to politics. My father voted conservative, and as far as he was concerned, his children would vote conservative. And one of my brothers, who reaching his teen years was beginning to explore thought, politically speaking, and he decided that he liked this politician on the left. My dad threw a bit of a temper tantrum. "No son of mine is going to vote for the NDP." And, you know, it's kind of a humorous story now, but when you actually analyze it, you're thinking like, come on, Dad. These kids, they need to grow into what they believe. There have been a ton of children who have been lost to the church forever, not just for a season, but forever, because of a belligerent father who will not abide their son or daughter doubting the existence of God. The model father respects the autonomy that this child made in the image of God is granted the very same freedom of conscience that you and I have, and that we need to invest in that and celebrate it and allow it to emerge and encourage it. And when my sons want to go and explore something that's stupid, I don't ever let them think or believe that I somehow endorse what they're doing, but I'm a fool to just say to them, "Don't do it. You're just wrong. Don't do that." Somehow or other, and follow this, and I probably have to do a whole sermon on this sometime. Somehow or other, I need to defend the right of my children to sin. Because if they don't own that sin for themselves, no amount of my piling on is ever going to bring conviction to their heart. The model father won't stand in the way of consequences. That's a problem these days. I'm already old enough that I get to say, I watch some young parents, and they're not helping their kids when they phone the school teacher and say, "What in the world's going on here? why has my son gotten a D on this report? And if you're a school teacher connected to the school system, you know that those calls happen all the time now. I have a lunch meeting with a friend of mine each Wednesday, just about every Wednesday, and he has young children who are in elementary school, and he's got one of his sons who is struggling with sort of self-discipline these days. He's not always doing his schoolwork the way he's supposed to be doing. And he had a project that he said he had to have done, but it was bedtime. And he said, "Dad, but I've got to get this done." And I said, well, how long have you had it? For a couple of weeks. Well, and it's just due tomorrow. Well, actually, it was due on a few days ago. His dad wouldn't let him do it. Made him go to bed. Went to the school teacher the next day and said, "You told us, son, you're going to hand in what you've got. You're just going to hand in what you've got." And he said to the teacher, "You're to give this boy an F on this assignment." Now, that's a problem because they're not supposed to do that anymore. So now the school teacher's in a bit of a conundrum, like, well, I'm not supposed to actually fail the children. He's only grade 5 or something like that. But my point is that there are consequences in life. And you know that in this imaginative story, this powerful father could have sheltered his son from the consequences somehow or other. But he waited for him to come home. His grace wasn't guarding against seeing his son, this little Jewish boy, desperately wanting to eat pig's food. Because if we are determined to walk into disobedience to the Lord, guess what? Someday, sooner or later, we're going to be where we don't want to be. And dads, you got to let your kids take that journey. You got to let your kids take that journey. But the model father has a love that refuses to give up. Now, I know how it works with family and friends, that there are occasionally things that sort of bubble and bubble and bubble and bubble and bubble, and finally it gets to this point where you go, I am done. I'm done. I don't care if I ever hear from you again. Go! Mess up your life. I've done my part. Fathers, God will never, ever, ever give up on you. Do not ever, ever, ever give up on your son or daughter. If they slap you in the face, literally or just figuratively, what would Jesus say? Give them the other side too. Don't give up on your kids. Because the model father is forgiving. Forgiveness is not separate from consequence, right? Things change. Dynamics change. Opportunities change. If I, as a wayward child, make very poor decisions and it ends up causing breaches in the family, inasmuch as my father may forgive me, it doesn't necessarily mean that everything gets good with the rest of the siblings. It may be that I've done things that have cut off my ability to pursue career choices and things like that, and they've moved on while I was messing around over here, and I never get to go back to there. And as a father, maybe I can't even facilitate that for them anymore, but it still means I must forgive and say, okay, you know what? We're done with that. We're going from here. Wherever here can get us, this is where we're going from. Always forgiving. Bless you guys. I know you're off to see Joan's dad now. Bless you. The last thing that I want to offer to you. So let me read them again. The model father teaches the truth from infancy up. The model father has respect for individual autonomy. The model father won't stand in the way of consequences. The model father has love that refuses to give up. The model father is forgiving. The last one that I wrote down here is that the model father celebrates. Celebrates. I mean, that's the story, right? That when this son comes home, God the Father celebrates. What's the scripture say? There's more joy in heaven when one sinner turns. Like celebrate. Because nothing is more vital in this world but that there are healthy human-to-human relationships, and principle in that is a family. And for all the challenges that families face these days, whether it is difficulty in your marriage or difficulty with your children or difficulty with your parents, for all of the challenges that are there, there is nothing more powerful and precious but that we find a way to care and love and support each other, and family is worth celebrating. And so at every opportunity, fathers, parents, find a way to celebrate your children. Find a way. They may be the goofiest goofs going right now. Find a way to celebrate them. Your other kids may go like, oh, come on. Why are you celebrating him? He's the screw up in the family. Celebrate your children at every possible chance. I had a lesson just a few days ago about not being cynical. I think I'm a glass half full guy most of the time, and I'm mostly a believer in people. But when you're the pastor of a church, pretty routinely there's a knock on the door of the building. And who will be there but someone who has a story? And oftentimes the story is not entirely consistent. Hello, Father. Usually if they have any kind of high church background, I'm not pastor, I'm Father. Hello, Father. My car broke down, and this friend stole some money from me, and it kind of goes, and more often than not, even though there's probably truth within it, it's been embellished. There really are not really very good actors out there. Because when you've been doing what I've been doing for 30 years, you can usually pick up the broken threads that aren't making sense, and you know that this story is being, flowered up a little bit so that I will somehow have compassion on the person for when they eventually get to the ask, which will be $5 for coffee or $20 for this or whatever. And I confess to you, and most of the time I'm right, but usually I like a good story, and so I'll find $5 or whatever and do what I can. I had a request this week was kind of unique, and it was I'm supposed to have a room at this motel over on that side of the city, but I don't have the cash for the key deposit. I'll pay you back tomorrow. That line's always there, right? And most of the time, it doesn't happen. It's just what it is. But I thought, the story was a good one, and I thought, well, whatever, fine. I drive them over to there, and I leave them, and I paid the key deposit, and I went on my way. He said, my friend's gonna meet me here, and I'm gonna pay the deposit before I leave. So just come back there tomorrow, and you should be able to get a refund. I put it on a card. Okay. So I go by there, and I know what's gonna happen, right? They're gonna say like, huh? What are you talking about? Nobody did that. I go in there. Oh yeah. I need your card, and then we'll refund you the money back. And I'm like, are you kidding? You're telling me that this person they actually did what they said they would do? I went away, and I'm like, great, I can hardly wait for the next person to come. I can hardly wait for the next person to come and ask me for help, because I'm encouraged now that this happens. Why am I telling you that story? Well, just so you know that I had this lovely surprise. But also, One of the things that often happens in the relationship between parents and children is that this really unfortunate cynicism finds its way into the relationship. Because you know what, all the things, Pastor, you just said they were supposed to be doing, you're thinking, I did that. I taught them young, and I have allowed them to meet their own consequences, and I have tried to make sure that my home is open to them whenever and should they ever come back, and I intend to celebrate them. I'm doing all these things, but if you're like me, it may be that there's just like this little sinister thread of cynicism that has kind of got into where it's like, that dumb kid. And almost like they're never going to get it. They're never going to get it. They're going to come and they're going to give me the story, and I'm going to listen to the story, and then they're going to go off and be stupid again. Right? I've seen that happen. I've felt that happen. I believe that the grace of God is sufficient to utterly and completely restore. When this boy in the story comes back to the father, he's got his story all rehearsed. He's been practicing it all the way home, and he sees his dad running to him. He's like, oh, man, okay, it's time. Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. And his dad doesn't even wait. His dad has somehow avoided the cynicism that would have said, yeah, you've sinned against everybody. You've sinned against me. What do you want now? It's like there's no cynicism. He understands that there is power in healing, in restoration, and forgiveness. And so, to those of you who know something of my story, don't miss the opportunity to embrace. Because cynicism has sort of painted the story that says that we don't do that. That's a metaphor, right? I missed an opportunity to take that relationship with my dad that it wasn't there, and it wasn't my fault, it was his fault. But that there was an opportunity there to just take it to some new layer of restoration, and I didn't take it. Don't let cynicism get in the way of what could be the greatest celebration you will ever know. Let's pray together.